Sorry about that. I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight once again. It's a really, really important night. I want to start by saying that this is a starting point, and I really want you to know that our team is working day and night without rest to continue this journey. And there's a lot of moving pieces to it. So tonight I'd like to just sort of take the board through a quick summary of where we are, how we got here, and then where we're going, some ideas there, and ask for the board's guidance on a couple of items. So we'll just jump in right away. Go ahead, Dr. Choi. So first of all, statement of the problem, the current fiscal crisis. As many of you know, SMUSD is significantly underfunded from the state and federal sources compared to districts like us. And we'll show you some data a little bit later on. We are heavily dependent on local revenue sources. I believe right now approximately 50% of our staff is funded through local revenue sources. Like most of the state, we're experiencing significant declining enrollment, which ties to a loss of revenues. We do not qualify for much grant funding or qualify really for minimal support because most of the grants in the state of California are oriented around your unduplicated pupil count, from which we have very low numbers. Our taxpayers are burdened with a progressive tax structure in the state that penalizes success. And our country is immersed in a political climate of distrust for government. Move on, Dr. Choi. So let's take a look at our expenses, mandates, and encumbrances. We suffer with exponential increases in employee benefits and pension mandates, not of any teachers or staff members' fault. This is a statewide problem. We are experiencing significantly greater expenses associated with special education, attributed to rising identifications of autism and spectrum disorders, an increase in advocacy for individualized services, and an increased propensity to litigate individualized services. Folks today are much more apt to contact outside advocates and legal help to get services. We are weighed down with significant facilities needs and deferred maintenance, really with no funding source to address those needs. We have a community who expects a varied and deep educational program, and that's what we want to deliver, combined with small class sizes that a private school feel. Prior to 2019, staffing levels were not adjusted to reflect a decline in enrollment, causing reserves to be depleted. And then prior to the failure of Measure E, SMUSD was projecting a positive variance in the ending fund balance, as referenced by Eric a few moments ago, due to effective expenditure reduction programs. I just want to pause there for a minute and make sure everybody understands that this layoff this year is a totally different situation than last year. When we faced that cliff last year, we were looking at being highly overstaffed. This is about a funding cliff created by the defeat of a renewal of a parcel tax that had been in place for years. So it's very different. Prior to that failure, we had the district for the first time in many years in the black. So, at the end of this whole thing, right, if we can fix that as a community, right, we're going to be back on track because we do have that budget under control at this point. Thanks, Dr. Choi. As far as our local revenue issues, due to many homes being passed down through trusts, resulting in low levels of assessed valuation, SMUSD does not qualify for basic aid status. And just a real quick explanation of what that means. There's only 2 basic aid districts in Southern California, in LA County, I should say. That would be Beverly Hills and Santa Monica. There's several in Orange County, like Laguna Beach. There's many basic aid districts in Northern California. Essentially, basic aid is this. If the state funding formula for your district is exceeded by your local revenues raised to support that, you get to keep all the excess. And I'm going to show you what that means for districts who are basic aid and why if we had updated valuation, we'd be in a totally different place. We are likely the most dependent school district in the state of California on local revenue streams. We have relied on 2 parcel taxes, the steady and historical support of the San Marino Schools Foundation, and significant PTA fundraising to support programs that other districts cannot afford. San Marino Schools Foundation has found it increasingly difficult to reach the annual fundraising goal of $2 million, jeopardizing future programs funded by the foundation. And then with the failure of Measure E, SMUSD faces that immediate $4.1 million funding cliff, necessitating a requisite reduction in expenditures offset partially by any future fundraising efforts. And I want to pause there just for a moment. Never have I referred to laying off teachers as a plan B. Never came out of my mouth. I've heard of it tonight. What I will tell you is without reserves and with a structural deficit built in, the only way to address, the major way to address that issue, because 85 to 90% of districts' expenditures are, people, salaries, pensions, benefits. It's terrible. It's an awful thing. There's no plan B. But the bottom line is we must, and this is the last point, we must develop steady and reliable local funding streams to remain viable in California. So let's jump into some information really quick. What I've done is I've run analytics on the 14 school districts I believe that we are most like in the state of California based on the size, the type of students we have, the wealth of the community, the style of the community, and you see these 14 here. And you'll see this kind of pop up here. The districts that are highlighted in blue are known as basic aid districts, which I described a few moments ago. So as you can see, we are just right there in that group of basic aid districts as far as how we deliver services. But go to the next slide, Dr. Choi. You'll see the yellow circle around that red bar. That's the level, the percent that San Marino relies on local revenue sources for its revenues to run its schools. If you look at the top of that chart there, Carmel Unified, right? Basic aid district, look at the amount of local funding required to run Carmel. The blue is the state funding, right? The LCFF. And so the reason Carmel, for instance, or Laguna Beach is so large is because their basic aid formula allows them to capture a great amount more of state funding. So on to the next slide, Dr. Choi. So this is kind of gives it a different picture, and this is different because if you look at the numbers, this is the revenue, the actual dollars, okay, that is raised for each student. So we're right there, midway down, once again, right in the lower end of that basic aid group. But the actual dollars collected in the year 2019 to run our schools was about $14,745 per kid. Look at Carmel for a moment, $26,177. Laguna Beach, $23,306. That's per student. I'm going to show you in a minute what that might look like if we had that kind of data. Go ahead, Steve. So the district that I actually found in the state that we are most like because of size and economics is Laguna Beach down in Orange County. And again, I want you to look at the red bar, the local funding at Laguna versus our local funding. Next slide, the state funding is the blue. Go ahead, Stephen. Circle up one more slide, Stephen. There you go. That's the local funding in Laguna Beach. And you can see once again that discrepancy that exists between us, okay? You can go to the next slide, Dr. Choi. So if San Marino had USD, which is almost exactly the same size as Laguna Beach in a very similar community and economics, if we had the basic aid formula Laguna Beach has, we would have had an additional $24,700,000 in revenues in the year 2019. So just put that in perspective for a moment. The structural deficit we had was approximately $3 to $3.5 million. Not only would we have satisfied that structural deficit, we'd have an additional $21 million to apply to our schools. And I think that's the strongest picture I can give you of the difference between San Marino, who's delivering on a similar type of education, what we could have if we were basic aid. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a spending comparison. So we looked at revenues for a minute. This is spending for small, wealthy, low LCFF and UPP unified districts. Again, the blue stars indicate the basic aid districts. The large blue bars is the percentage of expenses spent on certificated teachers. The light blue is the percent spent on pupil support services, and the orange is the percent of expense spent on administrative costs, and we'll show you that broken down here. So next slide. So as far as our pupil support services, our counseling, psychologists, other pupil support services, of the group of 14 that we're compared to, we are number 2. So we are spending 4.4% of our income in our expenses in 2019 on pupil support services. That's wonderful. We often hear of the importance of school counseling and support. The next slide, Stephen. We'll go back one, please. We're next as far as the teachers go. We are just above the average with this group of 14 school districts. Approximately 34.77% of current expense are on certificated teacher costs. And the next slide, of the group of 14, we are dead last in administrative expenses. And if you go to the next slide, since these rankings came out for 2019, where we were 319th out of 349 school districts, unified school districts in the state of California, spending on administration, we actually this last year reduced by another 0.3%, as shown in the second interim report in the last meeting, which would have made us 337th out of 347 school districts in administrative costs. Next slide. So the bottom line is we're very, very lean on the administrative side. So I'm going to run through this quick. This is another group of 14. These are just small school districts, 2,800 students to 3,200 students. Again, you'll see the red, local funding. None of these school districts rely on local funding like we do. Go ahead, Steve. Next slide. And again, spending comparison, even in this group of very small districts, we are the lowest administrated school district of this group of 14. Next slide, please. One problem that we are addressing is rising special education costs. That's us there kind of in the middle, and you can see the red bars that over the last 5 years, actually, our special education costs have come up quite a bit. And there's some reasons for that, one of which we'll show in the next slide. Before we get there, the overall special education costs in this group of schools, we are at 22.05% of our overall expenses devoted to special education, which puts us number 2 in that list. And you don't want to be high on this list. So the next slide, please. One of those items that has impacted us most over the last 10 years, you can see that we've more than doubled, in fact, almost tripled in our expenditures on special education aides in classrooms. And this has significantly impacted us both in salaries and in benefits as well. Go ahead, Stephen. I put this in only to demonstrate that our benefit costs here, I think our HR department and our unions have done such a great job of working together to keep these costs under control. If you look at this as a comparison of Laguna Beach and San Marino Unified, right now, 2020, Laguna Beach is spending $7,933 per employee. On benefits, we're spending only $7,018. So we are spending $284,419 less than Laguna Beach, but costs continue to rise. So what can and cannot be done? We've heard some really wonderful ideas and I've been writing them down. I really appreciate all the input. I think there's some great ideas out there in our community. So what is possible? We can continue to rein in costs, and we need to account for declining enrollment and natural attrition. So California continues to lose students, and our region continues to lose students. And we've heard it before. There are school districts around us closing schools. So we have to make sure that year in and year out, we account for declining enrollment with our staffing. We can streamline programs and combination assignments, and I know that's the hard work that's going on right now. We can negotiate salary reductions and furlough days. We can reduce special education spending, and the implementation of our multi-tier system of support strategies and SSD processes. They are designed to intervene for students at the lowest level possible, and really to get kids into programs, intervention programs that help them move along in their education. And when you have effective processes like that, you lower your special education costs because you don't divert kids into the individual education plans as easily. Also, we are pleased that we will be bringing on a new special ed director. That will be another part of our ability to rein in special education costs. As we've heard tonight from many folks, we need to raise local funds. We need to renew a parcel tax. We'll be talking about that here in a few minutes. We need to get behind a foundation campaign. I've had community members say we need to develop an endowment, maybe even just to deal with things like deferred maintenance or somehow endow positions. We need to reach out to alumni more effectively. We have a wonderful alumni out there around this country and around this world, and we need to be better at reaching out to them. And we also need to develop a greater facilities use fees schedule so that we are competitive with districts around us. We've heard future ideas: sell or lease surplus property. That's an endeavor that takes years in the making. It's something that the Board of Education has to do a lot of listening on in the community, and there's a lot of work that has to be done there. We need to build unique programs, academies, and magnets. We need to attract our kids back to our schools, right? And we need to attract new families to our community who are looking for a stellar education for their children that meets their kids' needs and really has a forward view of what we're doing to prepare our kids. There's the possibility that consolidating grade levels and sites, we've heard that a few times as well. These are all future ideas that will have to be talked about quite a bit with our community. What is outside of our control, however, is increasing pension costs. We have no control over that whatsoever. Health and welfare premiums increase, and we're hearing that this is going to take on staggering consequences as a result of the pandemic. We'll see how that goes. We cannot cut many of our special education costs. Many of those are outside of our control. We can't control that we're not a basic aid district. We'd like to be, but we're not. And we can't control the local control funding formula and its revenue swings. It's a formula that has been given to us and we have to live within it. As you may be hearing, more and more companies leaving California. That has a profound effect on the state budget for education. We cannot control our salary step and column. That's just a part of the structure of how we compensate our employees. We cannot control federal and state grant funding equity gaps. And we cannot control the fact that we lack developer fees from new development. So these are just some things that we can and cannot control. And so let's get on to some ideas here in a few moments. So in summary, SMUSD is not adequately funded by the state of California through the LCFF and must develop stable local funding sources. SMUSD has the highest dependency on local revenue streams of any district in the state that I could find. SMUSD has engaged in and will continue to take steps to right-size staffing to match enrollment. And SMUSD leadership had eliminated the structural deficit and had begun to restore the reserve account. If you look at our second interim report, as Mr. Lee referenced, you'll see that. The fact of the matter is the voters rejected Measure E in its form, exposing the district to an immediate $4.1 million funding cliff. So now the community of San Marino must engage in a financial strategy plan for the long term. I've heard many folks say, we can't just keep going through this every year, and I can't agree more. We have to get to where we have a long-term strategy for local funding. And it will include state, federal, local funding to match the values, goals, and actions of the district. The San Marino Schools Foundation will continue to engage in substantive fundraising to provide the general fund with a rising $2 million contribution to maintain and build programs. And I'm just so proud of the foundation and the work they've done over the years. I know so many of you probably listening tonight have served on the foundation or have supported the foundation. It's truly, before I came to San Marino, hearing about this foundation from the outside, it was just stunning that they've been able to do what they've been able to do for so many years. And so the superintendent, me, recommends to the Board of Education to develop and pass a new parcel tax resolution to have a measure placed before the voters at the earliest possible date to restore funding. Dr. Choi. So recommended next steps as far as reducing expenditures during this crisis. And I want to say we are in the middle of a financial crisis. And when you're in a crisis, you have to take extraordinary steps. So during this time, some of this may seem as minutia to you, but it's important. We're going to eliminate and or curtail unnecessary spending. Meals, donations will be sought. No meals will be bought. Water for the district, paper goods, equipment repair, all will be curtailed. There will be no travel or conferences, not that there has been this year at all, but there will be no travel and conferences unless it's limited to vendor or JPA sponsored or state one-time conference grant money, but no district resources will be used for any travel and conferences until this crisis is passed. And we will reduce memberships in some local clubs and organizations to reduce costs. From a maintenance standpoint, we're going to approve only crisis maintenance projects. Of course, student and staff safety is paramount, and that will continue to be on the front burner for us. But with the exception of necessary emergency repairs, only in-house work with minimal part expense will be allowed. Our district boardroom has not had a working air conditioner now in over a year, and we're not going to replace it anytime soon until after this crisis. We'll have to put on hold textbook and materials adoptions at this time, and we're going to continue to work with the City of San Marino on any possible shared services that we can come up with. We will look for additional cost savings, possibly through additional classified reductions in force, although we really are at a minimum, we believe. We will reduce consulting and legal fees to a minimum for compliance and protection. And we will minimize staff time for non-essential demands. So these are some steps that we're enacting immediately to help curtail any additional costs. As far as next steps with revenues, the San Marino Schools Foundation is working very hard to finish out their 2020-21 regular campaign, and I will do anything within my power to help support that and to work with James Lau and Aaron Bilbato and the foundation. Of course, you've probably already heard this, but we'll accept gifts, donations, or financial commitments from community groups. Our San Marino Unified School District Board of Education, I hope, will adopt a resolution to place a measure on the ballot to restore funding for teachers and counselors with no perpetual or permanent provision. That the board will provide direction to staff with regards to other possible funding sources related to carryover and one-time dollars. And we've heard that from many community members tonight. We are going to work to revise and implement facility use fees for all outside groups. These must be in line with industry or competition standards. We're going to work with the City of San Marino on any possible supports or joint use agreements that may be possible out there. And we're going to spend the CARES Act, COVID Relief Plan, and Federal Rescue Plan dollars in compliant but creative ways to offset this crisis. Dr. Choi. So that ends my presentation for this evening. And so I would invite Mrs. Ryan or the board members to chime in with questions or comments.